Hey y'all, today I'm going to show you how to crochet my Whims cowl. The crochet pattern calls for 112 foundation half double crochet stitches. For me, that was about 32 inches. Today I'm just going to be making a small swatch, so I'm going to foundation half double crochet 12 stitches. So I'm going to start out by making a slip knot and chaining 2. Yarn over, go into the first chain that you made, right through that top loop there, and be sure to pick up this back loop here. Yarn over, pull back through, yarn over, pull through the first loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. To find your next stitch, turn your work and look for the V, and that's where you're going to work your next stitch. So yarn over, go into your next stitch, go through both loops, yarn over, pull back through, yarn over, pull through the first loop, 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through those 3 loops. Turn your work, right there's your V. That's where we're going to work our next one. Yarn over, go into your next stitch, and keep working these foundation half double crochets until you reach 32 inches. And for me, that was 112 foundation half double crochet stitches. So you may want to go ahead and pause this video and make your foundation half double crochets, and I will meet you back at the end of this row. I just worked my last foundation half double crochet. Now chain 1 and turn your work. This row is going to be the linen stitch row. For the normal linen stitch, you're going to have an odd number of stitches. For this crochet pattern, you're going to put a single crochet in the first stitch of your linen stitch rows and in the last stitch in the row. That way we'll have an even number of stitches throughout the crochet pattern. Single crochet in the first stitch. And now we'll start working the linen stitches. To work a linen stitch, you're going to single crochet and then chain 1. So in this very next stitch here, right there, we're going to single crochet. And chain 1. We're going to skip the next stitch and single crochet in the next stitch. Chain 1. Skip the next stitch and single crochet in the next, single crochet, chain 1, and you just keep repeating that. Skip the next stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip the next stitch, single crochet, chain 1. Now we have 2 stitches left in this row. We're going to skip the next stitch and we're going to place a single crochet in the very last stitch. And you'll have the same number of stitches in this row as your foundation half double crochet row. And we're going to keep the same number of stitches throughout the entire pattern. Chain 1 and turn your work. And for this row, we're going to repeat the previous row. So you're going to single crochet in the first stitch. And we'll single crochet in the next stitch. The next stitch is our chain 1 space from the previous row. And we're going to single crochet in that space. So insert your hook in that space and single crochet. Chain 1, and we're skipping over the single crochet from the previous row and we're going to single crochet in the next chain 1 space. And chain 1. Skip the single crochet from the previous row and single crochet in that chain 1 space. Keep repeating this until you get to the last stitch in the row, and you'll place a single crochet in the last stitch. Now chain 1, turn your work, and for this row we're going to be half double crocheting. So we're going to half double crochet in the first stitch. This next stitch is a chain 1 space from the previous row. We're just going to go through the top of that stitch. You can see it right here. There's your V. Yarn over, go through both of those loops. The very top of that, and half double crochet, and half double crochet in each stitch in this row, and I'll meet you at the end. And now chain 2. Turn your work, double crochet in the first stitch, and now you'll place an Elizabeth stitch in the next stitch. To work an Elizabeth stitch, go into the stitch, yarn over, pull back through, yarn over, go back into that same stitch, yarn over, pull back through. You have 4 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And now you'll skip the next stitch and work an Elizabeth stitch in the very next stitch. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, go into the same stitch, yarn over, pull back through, yarn over and pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And that's how you work an Elizabeth stitch. Skip the next stitch, Elizabeth stitch in the next stitch. Skip the next stitch, place an Elizabeth stitch in the next stitch, and you'll keep repeating this until you get to the very last stitch in the row, and you'll place a double crochet in that last stitch. So keep working the Elizabeth stitches, and I'll meet you back at the end of this row. I just worked my last Elizabeth stitch for this row. Going to skip the next stitch and place a double crochet in that very last stitch. Chain 2, turn your work, and now let me explain a little bit about the Elizabeth stitch. Here's our Elizabeth stitch. This stitch right here was made by the Elizabeth stitch. And let me show you what I mean by that while I'm working another Elizabeth stitch. To work an Elizabeth stitch, you're going to go into your next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, go into your stitch again, yarn over, pull up a loop. You have 4 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over, pull through all 4 loops. That right there creates your Elizabeth stitch. And now you're going to chain 1, and that's the second stitch to the Elizabeth stitch. Your first stitch is right here, made by the Elizabeth stitch. The second one is made by the chain 1. Now let's go back to where we left off in the pattern. For this next row, you're going to repeat the previous row. Double crochet in the first stitch, and Elizabeth stitch in the next stitch. Normally for an Elizabeth stitch, you're going to place the next row of Elizabeth stitches in the stitch made by the Elizabeth stitch. So right here, this stitch here is the stitch made by the chain 1 after you completed your Elizabeth stitch. And this right here is your stitch made by the Elizabeth stitch. For this pattern, we're going to be working our Elizabeth stitches in this chain 1 space here. So insert your hook in that chain 1 space, yarn over and pull back through, yarn over, insert your hook back into that same space, yarn over and pull back through, yarn over and pull through all 4 loops, and chain 1. Skip the next stitch and place an Elizabeth stitch in the next, which is the chain 1 space. Insert your hook in that space, yarn over, pull back through, yarn over, insert your hook in that same space, yarn over, pull back through, yarn over, pull through all 4 loops, and chain 1. Skip the next stitch, work into the next chain 1 space, chain 1. And keep repeating that until you get to the very last stitch in this row, and I will meet you at that point. I just worked my last Elizabeth stitch for this row, so I'm going to skip the next stitch, and I'm going to double crochet in the very last stitch in this row. Now chain 2. Turn your work, repeat the previous row, double crochet in the first stitch, Elizabeth stitch in the next, which is your chain 1 space, skip the next, and Elizabeth stitch in the next chain 1 space. And keep repeating that, and I'll meet you at the last stitch in this row. I just worked my last Elizabeth stitch for this row. I'm going to skip the next stitch and double crochet in the very last stitch. Chain 1, turn your work, and now we're going to repeat row 3 of the pattern, which is the half double crochet row. Half double crochet in the first stitch, half double crochet in the next stitch, and place a half double crochet in each stitch in this row, and I'll meet you back at the end of this row. And these rows are the repeats for this pattern. We just finished the half double crochet row, so the next 2 rows after this will be the linen stitch rows, and then we'll work another row of half double crochets, and then the next 3 rows will be the Elizabeth stitch rows. And this is what it looks like. Keep repeating rows 1 through 7 in that order until you reach 10 inches or your desired width for your cowl. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching.